All right. Well, welcome everyone to our weekday text gathering. Today is day 91 on the Circle's text reading schedule, and we are covering chapter 5, section 9, the eternal fixation. In the complete edition, you can find this on page 224. This is a remarkable section with a great punchline, although to get there, Robert is going to take us all through a discussion on anal retention. So I'm looking forward to that. A quick reminder that you can find the recordings, handouts, and access links for these gatherings at circleofa.org/text gathering. As always, please feel free to use that link to invite anyone who could benefit from these classes and coming together in this way. These gatherings are free and everyone is welcome. I have been asked to include FIP references in these gatherings, and we can try to do that, and we will try to do that, but it's difficult because the sections don't always map onto each other. The section we're studying today, for example, doesn't even appear in the Foundation for Inner Peace version of the course at all. If you do not have a copy of the complete and annotated edition of A Course in Miracles, you can find it on Amazon. You can also find it on the Circle's website at circleofa.org. If you need a copy of the complete edition, but you cannot purchase one due to financial hardship, please send an email to info@circleofa.org and we will be happy to help. Thanks to some very generous Circle donors, we have a few CEs that we can send to students in true financial need as gifts, and we are always happy to do that. So I think that is it for the housekeeping. And before we get to the message, please bow your heads with me and we will begin with a prayer. Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to come together today as friends and mighty companions on this remarkable path of light. We surrender this gathering to you and ask that it serve your purposes and be blessed by you. Dear God, we ask that you remove in us any blocks to the awareness of your presence, and may we learn to think like you so that we may be led to the highest vision of ourselves and one another. We ask that you use this time to plant within us the seeds of grace, that we may emerge from this experience as more humble and loving beings. Purify our hearts so that we may hold your peace and join with us so our hands are strong to give it. Help us to look out for each other in this time and all time. We ask this so that we may be a source of miracles and healing within this group and within the world. And so it is. Amen.
Amen. Okay, well, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, this is an absolute favorite section of mine. I wish it was in FIP edition. It is in the original edition, which basically the Healing Casey version. What it does is it takes this Freudian idea of fixation and it completely reinterprets it so that it becomes a truly ennobling, uplifting concept, whereas the Freudian concept is not particularly those things, as you have been reminding me, Emily.
I'm fixated on that.
Yeah. Okay. And interestingly, what I'm calling a reinterpretation, Jesus is saying is the original meaning of the concept that Freud misinterpreted. So Jesus is just in his mind taking it back to its original form. Okay. So fixation in Freud. Freud believed that a child progresses through the oral, anal, and phallic stages, and that if any stage is not completed and released, the child then becomes fixated at that stage. As a result, that stage's method of obtaining satisfaction will dominate her adult personality. So in some sense, she remains stuck there. Her whole personality is is stuck at that unresolved stage. For example, everyone knows the term anal retentive. Remember watching Saturday Night Live, probably 30 years ago, they had a great bit on the anal retentive chef. He like keeps throwing things away because he hasn't cut everything just in exact perfect bits. Okay, so what's that about? We know the term, but we don't know its meaning in Freudian psychology, which is where it's from. So infants, when they reach the anal stage, that stage involves learning to control their bodily functions. However, if they don't complete and then release that stage, for instance, if they're too strongly chastised for toilet training accidents, then they can become fixated at that stage. And that means they'll be always compulsively trying to control. They'll become obsessed with being orderly. Okay, so they'll take the essence of that stage, learning control, and they're just stuck there. So they never really leave that stage. And the idea is that all these, at least with Freud, all these adults are walking around kind of stuck at some stage in their infancy or toddlerhood, and they're just never able to really release it and move on. Okay, so Jesus says in this section that this concept of fixation was an expression of Freud truly understanding fixation at some deep level, but then being afraid of it and kind of defending against it on the more conscious level. So Freud took some deep level true grasp of it and distorted it into what I just talked about. Okay, and what I want to do now is talk about what Jesus says is the real concept. Okay, and here are a few quotes that reflect that. And I love these quotes. Fixation is the pull of God on whom your mind is fixed. You were eternally fixated on God in your creation. And the pull of this fixation is so strong that you will never overcome it. You are always being pulled back to your Creator because you belong in Him. So you can tell, right, that this is a very radically different view of fixation. And so I've got this table here to try to capture the contrasts. On the left is Freud, on the right is the Course. So in Freud's view, it's rooted in infancy in this life. In the Course, it's rooted in our true beginning in God. Before time began, before the universe began, before the Big Bang. Okay, in Freud, we haven't released a certain stage in our infancy because we didn't complete it. In the Course, we haven't released our beginning with God basically because we left it and want it back. In Freud, we're fixated on this stage and thus constantly pulled back to it. Same thing with the Course. We're fixated on this beginning and thus constantly pulled back to it. In Freud, the pull is a desire to satisfy this stage. It's also like we're constantly trying to satisfy that unresolved stage. In the Course, the pull is our desire to return to our beginning and be immersed in the unconditional care of God. And that's what you see in the last paragraph of this section. This notion that we don't have to be careful or careless. We can cast all our cares away because God cares for us. And that's what we're desiring to just be in that care where we're completely cared for. It's not like our infancy in this life, although there's a distant relation in that we were cared for, hopefully, as infants. But it's instead this desire to be in this perfect heaven where we have not a care in the world because we're just showered with God's care. So you can see these are incredibly different concepts. They're parallel at every stage, but they're so different because of what we're being fixated on and pulled back to. The Freudian view obviously is not particularly uplifting. It's a kind of a depressing picture. I'm sure that happens. I don't know how much it happens with the oral, anal, and phallic stages, but surely things happen early in life that we become fixated on for life. Um, for instance, I've known a couple of dogs who were mistreated as puppies, and they never left that place. So they were fixated on that period in their lives. So it's a bit of a downer, but the view in the Course is, I think, incredibly uplifting, right? We're constantly being pulled back to the very highest place, whereas with Freud, we're being pulled back to pretty much the very lowest place. And that brings us to the subject of the pull of God. That's mentioned here in the quotes that I showed you, all three quotes, actually. Okay, this is a really important course teaching. I would love to do a whole class on it. I mean, our half hours would be too short, but if we had an hour or two, it's a great topic. So it says that inherent in our being is an overpowering pull to be with God, far stronger than any merely physical instinct. So instincts like sex, hunger, survival, they're nothing in strength compared to the pull of God. Quite an idea, isn't it? We fear that yielding to this pull will mean that we are uprooted. And so we find ways to deny and disguise it. And one of the really interesting mentions of this is mentioned several times. By the way, the pull of God was almost 100% edited out of the FIP edition. There's one really quick reference to it in, I think, chapter 12, maybe. Really passing, or maybe chapter 13. But there's a number of references to it originally. And one of the really interesting ones talks about how Helen and Bill looked like they were just doubtful about God and the Spirit and just not able to really believe. But what Jesus said was that was reaction formation. Now, reaction formation is a Freudian defense mechanism whereby there's something in you that you find threatening. And so you defend against it by putting on a pose on the surface of the exact opposite. So for instance, let's say you're really stingy deep down, and that you find threatening. So you put on this act of being like really generous. It's a way to cover up what you're afraid of within. So Jesus was saying that this pose we all have of, I just wish I had fewer doubts about God and the Spirit. And I wish I could muster up more belief. I know I need to. I'm trying to. He's saying it's all reaction formation. You really sense that overwhelming pull of God deep down, and it scares you. So you adopt this pose on the surface of being, I'm standing apart from the whole subject, and I just wish I could believe more, but I have my doubts, and I'm trying to believe more. It's all a ruse, Jesus is saying, to cover up this overpowering pull that scares you. Really fascinating idea, I think.
Yeah, this is an incredible idea. I think that we can all relate in some ways to something from our past. And I was saying in the chat that either influences, if not outright dominates, our behavior in the present. I kind of pick on the Freud example because I don't think it's the most relatable thing.
It's not relatable at all.
Yeah.
At least to me, it's not.
I think we can all relate to being emotionally constipated in some way, but I think we touch more on, like abandonment issues, and like the dog that you were talking about, that
Yeah.
dog was abused. It has a wound that carries forward in the present. And so I think we can all identify with that element to some degree.
Yeah. And yet, even though that's not quite as depressing as being fixated on your feces, it's not a very ennobling view that you're just constantly pulled back to this trauma from early on.
But what I think is also interesting in this section is how it talks about these fixations as a defense against that pull to God. And that I think we can relate to as well.
I'm not sure he's saying that the fixations are. Maybe he does believe that, but what he says is that
Didn't he say that about Freud?
he said Freud's concept, not Freud's fixations or our fixations, but Freud's concept of fixation was the kind of an expression of his fear of the real deal.
Okay. But I think we can also relate to the idea of being afraid of God because we fear that that pull will take us to a place of being infantilized.
Well, yeah. Yeah, and he talks about that in relation to Freud. It's subtly said in this section, but it's there that Freud thinks that, we're supposed to, maturity means escaping from being in a state where you have to be cared for by someone else. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're all trying to become mature and escape that dependency. And Jesus is saying the care of God, you can never escape it. You may try, you may think that you need to, but you can't.
Yeah, and the fact that it was given to us as at the moment of our creation, that pull that we can't escape is just part of who we are. It's in the fabric of who we are, is an incredible idea.
Well, it is, because what it means is everyone has an overpowering, irresistible pull to be at the very highest point in reality and in themselves. So we all are pulled to a perfect God and to being perfect ourselves, and we can't eradicate that. So that means, the criminal, the murderer has that pull and they can't do anything about it. And, dictators, mafia bosses, people that we think are really awful people,
Atheists.
atheists, right? Jesus, I'm sure, would think that atheism is reaction formation, right?
Reaction
Everyone's got it.
formation, in the sense that you're using your atheism as a defense because you're really feeling that pull towards God.
Right. And you're trying to convince yourself it's not in you because, look, you're an atheist. You can't stand the idea of God.
There's not many questions or much chat going on around this topic. I'm wondering why that is. Why is everybody
Who
so
knows?
silent today?
Who knows?
There's 128 people here and no
Oh,
chat and
really?
very few questions
Yeah.
on this topic. So I'm wondering
Well,
how
let's talk
you're
about it more
responding to
practically.
it.
Why don't
Okay,
we get more practical with it?
sure. Go for it. I mean, there's a couple questions, but
Okay. Well, do
please,
you want to have them fielded now, or?
not yet. Go into the more
Okay.
practical aspect of this because we've got time.
Okay. Well, Jesus talks about the benefits of the concept of fixation as he's talking about it. So, one is that fixation on something, you can get fixated on all kinds of things, and those things can be more real to you than things that maybe are more physically immediate to you. Um, so, that means because of our fixation, our beginning in God can be more real to us than our current external reality. That's a great advantage. Another one is it means we are all equipped with, quote, an irrevocable call to sanity, which the mind cannot lose. And that's that ennobling element that I've been talking about, to think that everyone has within them, however rotten we may think they are, an irrevocable call to sanity, which they simply can't lose. However hard they try, it's just there. And it's so strong, it frightens them. Maybe they aren't consciously frightened because they've defended against it so well that they just aren't conscious of it hardly at all. But somewhere inside, it's so overpowering, it's scary. So that's what he talks about as the benefits. What I love about this idea, and I guess it's already been said, but I love the idea that, I mean, when you think about so much of our assessment of people is how high and good and pure their desires are versus how low and base and destructive their desires are. So when you know someone and all their desires are really awful, they're base, they're cruel, you know, you think, well, there goes a bad person. I don't want to be around that person. When you know someone who really wants the good and the pure and the beautiful and the holy, then you admire and respect and love that person. And so what he's saying is all of us have an overpowering desire that's unquenchable for the absolute highest, purest, holiest. What a beautiful idea.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary idea. And it also, as we've been saying in these text gatherings, it gives us an opportunity to look at the things in our life that we are fixated on. Fixated on the past. We didn't get to cover the question of karma section. I know you're talking about it in the text class for Course Companions tomorrow, but
Yeah.
I love that line in there where it says, are you interested in healing your insanity or studying its past? And so we can get stuck in our childhood fixations and allowing them to influence and dominate our behavior in the present, or we can yield to that pull to God and let that be the North Star of our life. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
You know what I'm thinking?
Hmm.
I mean, sorry that the stray thought stopped you in your tracks. I really would like you to finish what you were saying.
Well, what's going to happen is I'm going to finish it and you're going to lose your stray thought. But
Oh, well, thank you.
So go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking about, you say the lack of response. I think what's going on in terms of the question, the Q&A thing, I think possibly what's going on is that I think the whole spiritual scene is massively defended against the pull of God, because we've all tried to like reduce God to something impersonal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a way to make God less scary. And it's because we've been brought up with the scary traditional God. But I think underneath that, there's also a way in which the real God scares us because there's this pull. And yielding to it is frightening to the ego. And one of the ways you just make it all safe and you cover the pull up is you make God impersonal. And I find that when I talk about God with course students, I hit up against certain barriers, silences, people pushing back,
Yeah.
because I think we've all got these God issues. For the most part, I think for the most part, course students have inherited the impersonal God from the wider spiritual scene. Doesn't exist in the course. I can say that very confidently, but we've all inherited it.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you got to finish your thought because yours was better than mine. But at the same time, what I do like, and we'll get to the questions here because we do have a few here. What I do like about the ending of this section is how it says, you think that through these fixations that you can overcome this pull of God, and you just absolutely can't. It says, do you really believe that you can make a voice which can drown out his? Do you really believe that you can devise a thought system which can separate you from his? Do you really believe that you can plan for your safety and joy better than he can? And so he's basically saying, give it up, because you're never going to be able to overcome that inherent pull of God that we all have.
Yeah. Well, let me just finish this out, and then we can get to questions, okay?
Oh, you weren't done? I thought you were done.
I wasn't done.
Okay.
And I have to leave like right at the half hour because I'm not ready for class afterwards. Okay. So can we see this pull in ourselves? I think it's useful to look at the ways in which the pull of God manifests in you. I encourage you to write some down. I'm not going to leave a lot of time for that, so I would get writing if you want to do that. But think about the ways in which you feel an attraction that kind of drives you to some degree. Like, how much do you feel that pull to meditate, for instance? How much do you feel the pull to spiritual truth? How much has the pull to in some way be closer to God, to know God, to experience God, governed your life? I think that pull shows up. I mean, we tamp it down, and we're nowhere near. We're aware of the very tip of the iceberg, but it's still operating. And for those of us here on this call in this class, it's probably shaped our lives profoundly. It's probably driven us in certain directions that meant other things and other people ultimately left our lives for good or ill. So the pull shows up, and it shows up in specific ways for each one of us. And being here in this class today, that's one of the ways it shows up. We all feel it. So think about, ideally, write down some of the ways it shows up for you. And then ask yourself, could it be that these are the evidence of a pull that is so intense that you are afraid? That is so overpowering that it can hardly be equated with the pull of human appetites. It's way stronger. And then ultimately is so strong that you cannot resist it. So could it be that these things you thought about in your life are the evidence that you're sitting on this huge iceberg, way bigger than you ever realized, a pull that's so strong that you can't resist it?
Yeah, and that seems to be the realization that's coming through in the chat now, is that there's been a lot of defense against God, and the recognition now that was actually a pull towards God. And someone said
Interesting.
they were gobsmacked by that. So that's really good to hear. One question from
Yeah.
Christine, and then, well, actually there's two questions, but Andy, your question about how many levels there are to the mind is going to be deeper than what we have time to cover today. But Andy, if you email me at emily@circleofa.org, I'll send you a resource for that. And Christine says, I have been hearing a lot lately from course students that we feel discomfort from any of the fear emotions and that we should sit with it, be in it, explore it. I usually just remember the truth and then forgive, but should I sit with it? And if so, how do you do that?
Well, the big instruction in the course, first of all, the course is constantly teaching you to understand what, the cognitive content of fear, what fear is made of, so that you're in a place to understand it and question it and let it go. But the big instruction in the course with emotions like that is to look at it calmly and let it go. Okay. So not so much immerse yourself, not get into catharsis, not identify with it, but not push it away. Look at it calmly as if you're apart from it, and then, use methods from the course to let it go.
Okay.
Is there another one, or is that it?
No, that's it. There's a question from Annie on the levels of the mind, but
Which is more than we have time for,
that's
really.
far more than we have time for. But the only thing I would say, just as we close, because I know you have to go to prepare for class, but the last paragraph in this section, the one that I was just reading from, where he talks about the ways in which we can merely cast our cares upon God. I feel like if anyone hasn't read this section before the gathering today, please go into the CE and read paragraph 10, because particularly in these times of great anxiety and great challenge, there's some wonderful language here about turning our cares over to God. His voice reminds you always that all hope is yours because of his care. You cannot choose to escape his care because that is not his will. but you can choose to accept his care and use the infinite power of his care for all those he created by it. So just a really wonderful message of hope, and that can be a light for the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful last paragraph. I'm seeing a comment saying it's difficult to hear for someone who's been through trauma that they should just get over it. We're not saying just get over it. We're saying that, there's a deeper thing going on in us, but it doesn't mean that you just are supposed to like toss your traumas aside as if they're nothing.
Yeah, again, that's more than we have time for.
Yeah.
I know you have to go, but thank you
Unfortunately,
all
I do.
so much for being with us here today, and we will see you tomorrow for our next text gathering. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.